When we talk about ancient civilizations, Americans usually think of Egypt, Greece, or Rome. But right here in the Americas, only a short flight from modern-day Texas or California, there existed a metropolis that could rival the size and sophistication of anything in the Old World. Teotihuacan was not just a settlement. It was a carefully planned city, an engine of culture, and a spiritual center that shaped the identity of an entire region. The story of Teotihuacan begins around 100 BCE. At this time, the Valley of Mexico was already home to small farming villages. The fertile volcanic soil made it ideal for agriculture, and rivers flowing through the valley supported crops such as maize, beans, and squash. Yet for reasons still debated by historians, a group of people decided to build something far larger than a simple village. They began laying out the foundations for what would become the largest city in the Western Hemisphere before the arrival of Europeans. Location was crucial. Teotihuacan sat in a broad valley about 30 miles northeast of present-day Mexico City. The site offered natural resources such as obsidian, a volcanic glass highly valued for tools and weapons. Obsidian trade became one of the city's economic lifelines. At the same time, the valley's geography allowed for large-scale agriculture, which could support a growing population. In short, Teotihuacan was positioned perfectly to grow, both economically and culturally. What makes the birth of this city so fascinating is that it was not tied to a single ruling dynasty, at least not in the beginning. Unlike Egypt's pyramids, which were built by kings to glorify themselves, Teotihuacan appears to have been more collective in nature at its origin. Archaeologists have found evidence that multiple groups and cultures from across the region may have contributed to its founding. Migrants from the surrounding valleys likely came together, bringing their traditions, rituals, and skills. This melting pot of peoples helped lay the foundation for a city that would eventually house more than 100,000 residents, a staggering number for the ancient world. The early builders of Teotihuacan also had an ambitious vision. The city was laid out on a grid system, with streets running at right angles, something rarely seen at the time. At its heart was a grand avenue, later called the Avenue of the Dead, stretching for more than 2 miles. This avenue connected major temples, plazas, and future pyramids. The very act of designing a city at this scale shows that the founders were thinking far beyond the needs of daily survival. They were planning for something monumental, literally and figuratively. Religion played a central role from the start. The builders aligned the city with astronomical events, suggesting they believed the layout itself was sacred. The Pyramid of the Sun, for example, would eventually be positioned in a way that interacted with the setting sun on specific days of the year. These alignments reinforced the idea that Teotihuacan was more than a place to live. It was a spiritual center, meant to connect humans with cosmic forces. For Americans today, it might be surprising to imagine that while our ancestors in the northern parts of the continent were living in small communities, further south, massive urban centers like Teotihuacan were emerging. The birth of Teotihuacan is a reminder that advanced city planning and monumental architecture were not inventions of Europe or Asia alone. They were deeply rooted in the Americas as well. By 100 CE, the foundations of Teotihuacan were firmly established. The city was expanding, drawing in people, ideas, and wealth from across Mesoamerica. It was no longer just a settlement, but the beginning of something extraordinary, a city that would one day awe its neighbors, influence future civilizations like the Maya and Aztecs, and eventually capture the imagination of modern scholars. The story of Teotihuacan's birth is, therefore, not just about stones, pyramids, or ruins. It is about ambition, vision, and the human drive to create something lasting. This city began as an idea that humans could build a community larger, stronger, and more spiritual than anything they had known before. That idea gave birth to Teotihuacan, a city whose name would later be remembered by the Aztecs as the place where the gods were born. If the founding of Teotihuacan was remarkable, its rise to greatness was nothing short of astonishing. Between the years 300 and 550 CE, the city became the largest and most powerful urban center in the Americas. At its peak, Teotihuacan housed well over 100,000 people. Some estimates suggest as many as 50,000 to 200. To put that in perspective, it was larger than most cities in Europe at the same time. When London and Paris were still small, Teotihuacan was already a thriving metropolis. What made Teotihuacan's golden age so special was not just its size, but its design and sophistication. The heart of the city was the Avenue of the Dead, a massive boulevard that stretched more than 2 miles long and up to 150 feet wide. This grand avenue connected the city's most important religious and political structures, including the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, Quetzalcoatl. Imagine walking down this road, once 500 years ago, towering pyramids on either side, plazas filled with markets and ceremonies, and thousands of people moving through one of the busiest streets in the ancient world. The Pyramid of the Sun, the largest structure in Teotihuacan, stood as a true wonder of the Americas. Rising over 200 feet tall and built from millions of stone blocks, it was one of the largest monuments ever constructed in the pre-Columbian world. Even today, climbing its steep steps and standing on top offers a breathtaking view of the valley below. For ancient residents, however, the pyramid was not just a landmark, it was a sacred space, aligned with astronomical events that tied human life to cosmic cycles. The builders carefully positioned the pyramid so that the sun set directly over its western face on certain days, making the entire structure a kind of giant calendar. The Pyramid of the Moon, located at the northern end of the Avenue of the Dead, was slightly smaller but no less impressive. It was likely used for religious rituals, including offerings and sacrifices, meant to ensure prosperity and balance in the natural world. Between the two great pyramids, the city's planners created plazas where thousands could gather for ceremonies. These plazas weren't just about religion. They also reinforced social order, reminding everyone of their place in a community far larger than themselves. Religion and politics in Teotihuacan were deeply intertwined. The city's rulers, whoever they were, since we still don't know their names, governed through a combination of spiritual authority and administrative control. Some archaeologists suggest that instead of a single king, Teotihuacan may have been ruled by a council of elites, which would explain the collective nature of its early development. Whatever the case, the leadership ensured that Teotihuacan's culture spread across Mesoamerica. Trade was another key factor in the city's rise. Teotihuacan controlled the production and distribution of obsidian, the volcanic glass used to make blades, arrowheads, and ceremonial objects. Its influence extended hundreds of miles, reaching regions as far as modern-day Guatemala. Artifacts from Teotihuacan have been found across Mesoamerica, a sign of its wide economic reach. This trade brought not only wealth but also cultural exchange. Merchants, artisans, and travelers carried with them new ideas, religious symbols, and artistic styles. One of the most fascinating aspects of Teotihuacan was its multi-ethnic character. Excavations show that people from Oaxaca, the Gulf Coast, and even the Maya lowlands lived in distinct neighborhoods within the city. These communities brought their own traditions and languages, yet they were integrated into the wider life of Teotihuacan. In this sense, the city was like an ancient version of New York, diverse, bustling, and constantly changing. Art and architecture flourished during this period as well. Murals painted in bright colors covered the walls of temples and apartment compounds, depicting gods, animals, and symbolic figures. Unlike the later Aztecs, who emphasized violent imagery, Teotihuacan's murals often focused on fertility, water, and abundance. The city's art reflected not just a desire to glorify rulers, but a broader vision of harmony between people, nature, and the cosmos. By the middle of the 5th century CE, Teotihuacan stood at the height of its power. Its pyramids dominated the landscape. Its influence stretched across Mesoamerica, and its population rivaled the largest cities on Earth. For the people who lived there, the city must have seemed eternal, a sacred center that would last forever. Of course, history teaches us that no city, no matter how powerful, is immune to decline. But during its golden age, Teotihuacan was a shining example of what human creativity, cooperation, and ambition could achieve. The rise of Teotihuacan was spectacular, but like every great civilization, its power did not last forever. Around the middle of the 6th century CE, something dramatic began to change. The city that had once been a beacon of culture and religion started to decline, and by around 750 CE, it was largely abandoned. For a place that had dominated central Mexico for centuries, its fall remains one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. The first signs of trouble appeared sometime after 550 CE. Archaeological evidence shows that several of the city's major buildings, including the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, were deliberately burned. Walls blackened by fire and broken statues suggest that violence broke out in the heart of the city. But was this an invasion from the outside, or a rebellion from within? Scholars continue to debate. One theory is that the lower classes, tired of supporting the elites and religious authorities, rose up against their rulers. Another theory is that rival groups within the city turned on each other, leading to civil conflict. At the same time, environmental challenges may have been making life harder. The Valley of Mexico was heavily dependent on agriculture, and if droughts struck, as some climate studies suggest, they would have put immense pressure on the population. Food shortages could have fueled unrest, pushing the city into crisis. Without a reliable food supply, even the most powerful rulers could not maintain order. Trade, too, began to shift. Teotihuacan had long thrived on its control of obsidian, but as new trade routes developed elsewhere, its monopoly weakened. Other rising powers, including the Maya in the south, may have challenged Teotihuacan's dominance. Losing control over trade meant losing wealth, and with less wealth came less ability to support the massive infrastructure of the city. The burning of temples and elite residences suggests that Teotihuacan's political structure collapsed dramatically. Unlike Rome, where we know the names of emperors and generals, Teotihuacan left no written records to tell us who was in charge. That silence makes its fall even more haunting. It is as if a whole society unraveled, leaving behind only stones, murals, and ruins to tell its story. By the 7th century, large parts of the city were already empty. Families moved away, trade networks shifted, and the grand plazas where thousands once gathered grew silent. By around 750 CE, Teotihuacan was no longer the powerhouse it had been. The once bustling metropolis became a ghost city, its pyramids still standing but its streets deserted. For the people of Mesoamerica, however, Teotihuacan did not simply disappear. Later civilizations, including the Toltecs and the Aztecs, saw the ruins with awe. To the Aztecs, who rose to power nearly 700 years after Teotihuacan's decline, the city was a sacred place beyond human comprehension. They named it Teotihuacan, meaning the place where the gods were born. To them, it was not just an abandoned ruin, but the birthplace of the sun and moon themselves. The Aztecs believed that divine powers had shaped the pyramids, and they wove the city into their mythology. The fall of Teotihuacan is a sobering reminder of the fragility of human achievement. At its peak, the city must have seemed eternal, built of stone and aligned with the cosmos. Yet internal divisions, environmental stress, and shifting economics proved stronger than even its grand pyramids. What remains most remarkable is not just that Teotihuacan fell, but that its influence continued long after the last resident left. Its architecture, religious symbols, and cultural memory lived on, carried by the civilizations that followed. Standing among the ruins today, one can almost hear the echoes of its decline, the whisper of forgotten voices, the silence of empty plazas, and the lingering question of how such a mighty city could vanish. The fall of Teotihuacan is not only an ancient mystery, it is also a timeless lesson about power, fragility, and the fate of civilizations. When Teotihuacan fell silent around 750 CE, its massive pyramids and plazas did not crumble into dust. They remained, towering over the Valley of Mexico, watching centuries of history pass by. While the people who had once built and ruled the city vanished, the memory of Teotihuacan refused to disappear. Later civilizations encountered its ruins with awe, reshaping its meaning to fit their own beliefs. In this way, Teotihuacan became more than just an ancient city. It became a legend, a symbol, and a lasting influence on the Americas and the wider world. The first major rediscovery of Teotihuacan came not from modern archaeologists, but from the Aztecs, who rose to power nearly 700 years after the city's decline. For the Aztecs, the ruins were sacred. They believed that the pyramids were built by gods, not humans, and that this valley was the site of cosmic creation itself. According to Aztec mythology, the sun and the moon were born at Teotihuacan, rising from its pyramids to illuminate the world. It is thanks to the Aztecs that we even have the name Teotihuacan, which translates to the place where the gods were born. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 1500s, they too were struck by the sight of the massive ruins. Hernán Cortés and his men could not believe that indigenous people had built such monumental structures. European chroniclers often described the pyramids with disbelief, comparing them to the wonders of the Old World. Unfortunately, the Spanish conquest also brought destruction. Many artifacts were lost and local traditions were suppressed. Still, the pyramids themselves remained too massive to erase. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, when professional archaeologists began systematic excavations of Teotihuacan. They uncovered the scale of the city's planning, its murals, and its neighborhoods. Excavations revealed that Teotihuacan was not simply a ceremonial center but a true metropolis, with apartment compounds, workshops, and evidence of a diverse population. Discoveries such as burial chambers, religious offerings, and obsidian workshops gave modern historians a clearer picture of daily life in the city. Yet mysteries remain, especially about its rulers. Unlike Egypt or Rome, Teotihuacan left no clear record of kings or dynasties, keeping scholars guessing about how power was truly organized. For today's world, Teotihuacan carries two powerful legacies. The first is cultural. The city influenced nearly every civilization in Mesoamerica that followed. The Maya, for example, incorporated Teotihuacan imagery into their own cities. Centuries later, the Aztecs drew religious inspiration from its pyramids and made pilgrimages to its ruins. Even modern Mexico embraces Teotihuacan as a national symbol, with millions of people visiting the site each year. Climbing the Pyramid of the Sun has become almost a rite of passage for anyone interested in connecting with Mexico's deep past. The second legacy is universal. Teotihuacan challenges the traditional, Eurocentric view of history that often places civilizations like Greece and Rome at the center of human achievement. When Americans learn about Teotihuacan, they discover that their own hemisphere had cities just as large, just as organized, and just as spiritually powerful as those across the Atlantic. For U.S. audiences, this is a reminder that world history is richer and more interconnected than textbooks often suggest. Teotihuacan was not a backwater. It was a global player of its time. Even in the 21st century, new discoveries continue to emerge. Archaeologists using modern technologies like LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar have uncovered hidden tunnels beneath the pyramids, suggesting that entire ceremonial complexes remain undiscovered. These finds remind us that Teotihuacan still holds secrets waiting to be revealed. Today, walking through Teotihuacan is a surreal experience. Tourists from around the world gather on the Avenue of the Dead, imagining what it must have been like when the city was alive with tens of thousands of voices. The pyramids, weathered but still standing, tell a silent story of ambition, faith, and resilience. For many, it feels less like visiting a ruin and more like stepping into a timeless monument to human creativity. Ultimately, Teotihuacan's legacy is one of endurance. Though its rulers are forgotten, though its fall remains a mystery, the city itself continues to inspire. It shows us that human beings, regardless of where they lived or when they lived, have always strived for greatness, beauty, and meaning. In this way, Teotihuacan is not just Mexico's heritage, it is humanity's.